when you look at the deals that have been done over the past couple years, it really comes down to integrations. How well integrated are these practices? And maybe it's not, are they all on the same exact practice management system? Although, that's a huge positive as well. But is there an enterprise view? Are there financials? Are there KPIs that you can look at that marry the entire organization? And do you have management efficiencies within the organization? So I think for a while, people were chasing EBITDA, right? Like they were just mashing together disparate systems and disparate organizations and just calling them DSOs. And now I think buyers have become a lot more.
Welcome back to the Dental Economist Show with me, Mike Huffaker. Before we get started today, I do have a request for the audience. If you enjoy listening to the show, it would be very much appreciated if you're willing to like, subscribe, or even better, leave a review. This helps expand awareness of the show so that new listeners can find it. And as always, I really do appreciate you listening. So today, I'm very, very excited to welcome Eric Pastan, a seasoned expert in the healthcare M&A space with a sharp focus on the dental industry, a former DSO owner who scaled a group from 1 to 45 locations. Eric is now a director at Skytale Group, where he has guided numerous multi-location dental groups and DSOs through complex transactions, helping them scale, grow, and successfully navigate partnerships. Eric, it's really fantastic to have you on the show today. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, Mike, and I really appreciate you guys having me. I've heard, nothing but great things, and have always been watching the podcast, so it's kind of surreal to actually be on it.
Well, really looking forward to the conversation today, and I love your background. You've been there, done that. You've been a real operator, and now you're helping groups kind of navigate all of the things that you've gone through previously. Maybe to start us out, can you share a little bit about your journey into the dental industry, kind of what initially sparked your interest, or maybe how you ended up here?
Yeah, of course. And I'm laughing because I don't know if anyone gets their interest sparked by the dental industry, but I did find myself here. It was somewhat of a circuitous route. Like I said, I didn't dream of being in the dental industry as a child, so I had to find my way here. And ultimately, I was working in the banking industry and saw that mid-market entrepreneurial business owners, saw a high level of success, 100 years ago when I was looking for something to do. And so I started thinking through what the opportunities were for me to start being involved in some sort of mid-market entrepreneurial endeavor. I ended up matching with a friend of mine whose sister is a dentist. They felt like it was the right time to buy a practice, and I did that alongside them. So it wasn't, essentially planned, although now having been here for what feels like 50 years, it's a really comfortable place to be. It's a great, group of people that really feels that the rising tide lifts all ships. So, I couldn't be happier that I ended up in the dental industry because I think it's a really good place. And ultimately, at the end of the day, delivers good outcomes for patients, and ultimately that I think is what we're all here for.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's funny. After you said that about the sparking the interest, I reflected on kind of my own entry into dental, and it was actually anything but that when I was first reached out to, and they're like, "Yeah, do you want to come scale up a SaaS software company's organization and dental?" I was like, "Yeah, no, thank you. I think I'm good." But to your point, once you get into the space, one of the great things about it is the whole rising tide, lifts all boats. And I think that many people kind of believe in that philosophy here. Now, when you first started to scale Dr. Dental, like, did you ever have a notion that it would become as large as it did? Was there a plan for that? Or did it happen almost by default through just kind of experience, growth, and recognition that you had a formula or a platform that was enabling the growth to occur?
Yeah, I mean, I'll say yes, kind of all of the above, right? I mean, did everything go according to plan? Absolutely not. Were we very thoughtful in our approach? Absolutely. So, we went into it thinking, if we can learn this business, we felt that we could be successful. It's kind of funny, my first experience was sitting at a front desk learning that role in the office. And I sat at the front desk because prior to working in banking, I had lived in Central America and learned Spanish down there. So I could actually communicate with a lot more patients than some of my business partners could. And so I was answering the phones. And so we prided ourselves of rolling up our sleeves and really engaging not only with the people and the patients, but also with the business to really learn it from the inside out rather than the outside in. And so, kind of what you were speaking to earlier in the sense of really not only understanding dentistry and having owned a DSO, but I literally sat in every role in the office, answered the phones, scheduled patients, dealt with, kind of things when they went sideways, and then eventually replaced myself and became the office manager and just kind of went up from there. And so along the way, there were inflection points where when we figured, yeah, we can do this at that next level. And, there was something that we always used to say to each other is that, you're standing on two sides of a river, if you will. And you're trying to build that bridge as close as possible to connect it so that it's a safe skip to safety rather than a leap of faith. And that's what we were trying to do. We were trying to really connect those two sides of the bridge as close as possible to make sure that it wasn't, we weren't doing anything we shouldn't be doing. And so once we got to that point where we felt we were in relative safety, we started to grow from there and open up new locations.
That's great. Yeah, I've now, I think, interviewed roughly 60 people on this show over the past year. And out of all the interviews, yourself and one other person have shared that they sat in the office for a period of time when they were starting their group. And that, I don't know if you know who Brandon Halcott is. He started True Family Dental, and now he's started another DSO called Seva. But that was his approach initially too. Was like, I'm just going to go work in the office. I got to learn like what this looks like, and it's not a common comment that I hear. So that really must have given you kind of that foundational understanding of what works, what doesn't. Do you have any maybe horror stories or something that happened while you were growing that was just ended up being a learning experience, but might have been terrifying or awful at the moment?
you know I mean, there are so many stories of kind of over the years of things having gone sideways. I just told one the other day that I don't know if it was avoidable, but I woke up one morning and the office called me and said that there are some bees in our practice. And I said, how many bees could there be in the practice? Like, can't we just open the door and they fly out? And they said, no, I don't think you understand. There are thousands of bees in the practice. And so I drove down, and sure enough, we had an infestation of bees because the landscapers had cleared out some area in front of the office, and the bees had found a home in our drop ceiling, and we dropped it down. There was like the biggest hive I've ever seen in my life. And so, it's experiences like that sound ridiculous, but you're forced to problem solve. You're forced to do it with your team. You figure out what the problem is, and then you attack it in order to make sure you got to a solution that was worthwhile. And I think that approach of just being not only proactive, but also having a plan when you go into it has translated and become critical to a lot of the success that I had when we were owning and operating the DSO, and also that I talk through with my clients. And it certainly helps now that I'm an advisor or consultant or however you want to frame it, having worn those shoes before and being able to talk to them about, not only does this sound like a reasonable solution, but yeah, like I had bees too, right? Like this is how we approached it and this was successful. Got it. That worked, And so again, not necessarily the bees, but it's a really good example of a lot of the scenarios that we talk through and viable approaches to solving them or coming to some understanding of them so that we can move forward. And a lot of the DSO space is just kind of meeting those challenges in the face, figuring out how to overcome them, or by avoiding them by planning properly. And I think when you talk about success at a larger scale, to me, it becomes okay, how do we plan properly so there can be as few of these B experiences, when you apply that to finance or operations, as possible. And so, if you do have everything budgeted out, if you do have your KPIs and expectations set up with your staff members that are appropriate and attainable, and everyone knows what the expectations are, and then you start measuring them for success, that's going to be a lot better than just start like talking about success without at first telling them kind of the ground rules of the expectations and where it's going to come from. And so, I revert back to the bees. There's a couple more insane examples that I can tell you of, just bizarre things that have happened over the years. But I think again, it's about preparation and planning that ultimately lead to long-term success.
Yeah, I want to get into kind of the KPIs and expectation setting and just a minute here. You eventually sold the business to private equity, right? Can you share about that process? If there were any surprises that occurred during that, and what your kind of strategic approach to that exit was when you think about the different options related to maybe a strategic affiliation with another DSO versus bringing in private equity, and how you came to the conclusion to follow the path that you did.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like, when we did it, the term DSO was such a new term to to dentistry, and the idea of EBITDA and profitability was something that, no one really was talking about back then unless you were going through a transaction. So I think my world quickly unfolded to start to understand, we were intimate with our P&L, and our managers were really intimate in understanding the P&L. So they understood the difference between driving revenue and driving profitability. But when we started to look at the transaction, what we realized is that, there were multiple areas that we hadn't probably focused enough on to leverage, positive profitability and ultimately more enterprise value from in a transaction. So, I tell our clients all the time, had we had an organization like Skytale or some of the other groups that exist out there to help us focus on that stuff, 12 to 24 months in advance, we probably would have come out a little bit better on the other side. At the end of the day, we always felt like if we ran a great business, we would be okay at the end of the day. And I honestly think that, at the end of the day, the reason why we transacted was because, we treated our patients and our staff really well. We educated all of them, and gave them an opportunity to succeed and rewarded them when they did. And so I think, going back to your question, it was reassuring to hear that a lot of what we did was the right thing. And we learned some lessons of probably what we should have done differently, had we had the opportunity. And then, I guess and then understanding the world of private equity and investment banking, and, having gone through the process of, 20 or so management presentations and sims and everything else that go into it, was a really interesting experience that I had not, had any experience with prior. And so again, it's something that I've kind of taken with me as I've moved on and transitioned into the role I'm in today, to raise awareness of all of that, of that pre-planning that should go in as you get closer to a transaction, as well as what it feels like to go through a transaction and kind of some of the perspective you should take into it. You've got to have thick skin, as they kind of poke and prod your organization.
Yeah. So you moved into Skytale. You do management consulting now for groups, DSOs, emerging groups, people that want to grow and expand their business. I know that you're big in data, developing systems, defining success. You touched on that just a couple minutes ago. One of the comments that you just made was like, if we run a great business, like it's going to be okay. And when you're talking to now your clients, how would you define a great business? Like, what does that look like? I know there's this kind of like intersection of profit and purpose, and dental's an interesting space. You talked about providing great care for patients, but give me kind of your high level view of the definition of a great business in dental today.
Yeah, I think a great business in dental is one that's really focused on the clinical aspect of dentistry. At the end of the day, you have to have good clinical outcomes, and everything else should support that idea, right? When I say that, I mean that operations should be set up from the perspective of, is what we're doing today geared towards our patients' clinical outcomes? And if the answer is yes, is that how do we improve it? If the answer is no, then you're in serious trouble. But assuming the answer is yes, then it's about how can we create less friction in the office between non away from those positive clinical outcomes, move it to hopefully a different physical location. If we don't have the resources to move it to a different physical location, how can we divert it away from, say, the front desk that has a million different responsibilities? How do we distill those down to the core responsibilities that are really going to drive clinical outcomes, and then create, either bring in technology or other FTEs or whatever it is to be able to divert that that data or that process away from distracting from those clinical outcomes. Obviously, you can't get that to zero, but we always talk with our clients about what are the real levers that you have to pull in the office for those outcomes that you have that you want to get. We talk a lot through the lens of profitability. So, it's still those clinical outcomes that are going to lead to the revenue that you have bringing it, that you have coming in. The more time that you afford your people in the chair or having conversations with the patient is going to lead to higher acceptance rates. That's going to lead to better clinical outcomes and better conversations. So, the ethos of an organization has to be treating the patient with the utmost care. And then everything else kind of has to function in underneath that you align everything in a way that your systems, and when I say systems, that's a term that I, harp on with my multi-location clients, because there should be systems in place, because part of that service delivery is dependent on an understanding throughout the organization, so that you can be in one location, go to the next, and there are systems in place that you can follow to understand, hey, listen, this is where our challenge lies because we're following this system, and this is where the bottleneck is, or this is where we need help. And it's different in each office. So to have those systems in place, you're going to be able to identify them quicker. And what I like to say is fail faster. It's okay to make mistakes. And, I won't say for the dentist, but on the business side of things, I think it's okay to make a mistake. That it comes down to recognizing that as quickly as possible and fixing it. And part of that recognition is identified because you have a budgeted plan or systems in place, or a technology that's indicating that we have to pay attention to something over here because we're not getting the result we had thought we were going to get.
Yeah, let's dive into that a little bit more. So, maybe I'll take a step back here and frame this as, let's say you're a doctor-owned group, 5 locations with a desire to grow and scale, and they come to you, and you're looking at the business overall. Foundationally, what are the things that need to be put in place to ensure that you're set up for future growth? Is it all tied to systems? And can you give a sense of what are some of the most crucial outcomes that the systems are solving for that you need to ensure that you have?
Yeah, I mean, and I think you had mentioned it before, it's data. right? That you have to be able to have access to in order to make all of these decisions and create budgets and create expectations. And I mean, listen, at the end of the day, that's what KPIs are. It's pieces of data. So you need to be able to have good data in order to have good outcomes and good plans. And so, it starts with the quality of the data input that you have and the systems you have in place that allow for transparency of this data. I like, I'm a big fan of keeping it simple. I don't like, people have to do like advanced algorithmic math in order to figure out revenue or profitability or anything like that. So, the systems that spit that out automatically, to me, are the ones that are going to give you the best results. It's going to streamline your processes, and you're going to be able to depend on them. Now, so you have the right systems in place from a technology perspective. You have to be looking in the right place, and you have to be able to have this set up so that everyone understands what those expectations are. And so, to me, success is predicated on having the right technology and the right systems in place, but then having a dashboard or some sort of format for that data so that you can show whomever needs to see it, whether it be the doctor, the clinical team, the operations team. I like to call it front of the house, if you will. I spent too much time waiting tables in my younger career, and the front of the house, and then it's the marriage between them that you give them the data they need to see to understand how well they're doing, or the areas that they need to focus on, so that you can then take and look at it on an even playing field, excuse me, and be able to compare. I think you mentioned 5 offices, right? And so then you can take a global look at this, and I like enterprise type software so that you can have the drop down, look at it from a consolidated perspective, look at it from an individual office perspective, and then identify the offices that are really good in some areas and the offices that are struggling. And if you can match them together with an office that's really excelling in a certain area, with an office that might be struggling, and leave it to them to kind of figure out some of these solutions. As a leader, you're doing your job by empowering them to make change. And that's where I think that a lot of that success lies, is that, if you have 5 offices, hopefully you have some leadership underneath you that allows you to kind of allows them to find this success kind of independently.
Now, you mentioned keeping it simple. And I love that concept. And I think it often is harder for people to do than you would think. And especially when it's related to data and analytics. So there's a proliferation of data and analytics solutions in the marketplace today. Lots of different technologies, lots of different providers that do different things. Can you have too much? And can you start drowning in all of the metrics without actually making any data-driven decisions that are helpful for your practice? And how do you keep it simple?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is definitely analysis paralysis, right? So, for some people that just can't get away from the data, I do think that you need to trust, either yourself or some of the people that you choose to surround yourself with in order to make decisions. And, listen, I congratulate a lot of the owners that come to us and realize that, hey, listen, having an outside lens to look through this with, whoever it might be in the marketplace, can be a helpful resource, because a lot of the entrepreneurial kind of that middle market DSO owners are the dentists themselves, that they've never taken a course in the business of dentistry or business itself. And so, I think that can be intimidating, on a large scale. When you have 1 or 2 offices, maybe less so. When you start to get into 5 offices, you're talking about some major decisions that can cause either a serious interruption in cash flow or a large investment for the organization. And so to be able to think through that and make the right decision, I think it makes sense to leverage outside resources or someone or something that you trust. There are plenty of kind of groups out there that discuss this. We're not reinventing the wheel these days, so there's someone out there that I'm sure you can use as a resource. But I think to answer kind of the second part of your question, too much technology can be a bad thing. It can be overwhelming. And one of the downfalls to me, I think, with too much technology is that a lot of times it's kind of put in place and then you just move away from it. And so, if you have too much technology, it takes away from the impact or at least the transition that you can do to implement it. It's like a lot of times I hear kind of the tech people that I know say, adopting the technology is where it starts. It's the implementation of it, and then creating that resource that you can rely on, day in and day out. That takes 3 to 6 months of repeated concentration. That's when it's going to start to take hold. So if you have too much technology that you're not leveraging it in the right way, then I would argue that you're kind of wasting your money, or at least you should take a serious look at if it's doing what you had hoped that it would do.
Yeah, there's a lot of monthly checks being written for solutions that are not being adopted across organizations in a consistent manner. That's for sure. You mentioned P&L earlier, and you said something along the lines of being intimately familiar with the P&L or always keeping it front and center. Talk about that. How is that? How do you coach that in your clients? What are the important things to be
looking at? Is this something that is gender and observant to you, moving you to the fact that finance can be like a thorough image for people, and just kind of share a little bit the importance of that.
I think, first off, not everyone understands, what a P&L is. A lot of times, we have clients and I just came back from a few meetings, I'm up here in Boston. Yankee Dental was the other day, and walking around, you can see that there's just a lot of confusion of what data needs to be focused on. I think the P&L is probably arguably the most important from a financial perspective, because a lot of offices and within dentistry for years, these dental offices were running at such a profit that you could concentrate on revenue and you're going to be okay at the end of the day. If you have one practice, two practices, you can probably get away with it. Is it right? Absolutely not, but you can get away with it. Really, if you want to concentrate on growth, it comes down to profitability, and profitability is understanding, what's left over at the end of the day, right? I mean, it starts with revenue, but it ends with profitability, right? And so what we tend to do is really talk our clients through each of the line items that go into, or at least the major buckets that goes into the P&L to start with. And that's what I like to talk to their management teams about. Usually it's the office manager or regional manager, because there are a lot of expenses, and that's the L side of the P, that you need to account for and understand in order to realize whether you're running a good business or not. All the revenue in the world, if you're taking in $2 and spending $5, you're not making money. And so it's really about, how do we understand what is reasonable within a dental office P&L? So what are the buckets? What are kind of the national averages when you look at certain parts of those major buckets? The big ones, employee expense, right? Your number one expense. And so, how much does it cost really to employ everyone in your organization? That's going to be your number one cost. It's going to fluctuate. So when you start to look at the different parts of your office and the expense there, COGS is another big one. What are we spending on supplies? Procurement is a huge topic in, as you go to a lot of these dental meetings. There are these entire platforms that are now created, technology wise, aim to control your cost of goods sold, is what COGS stands for. So understand, how that can be controlled, what's reasonable for the different type of practice. Maybe a general dental practice has a goal of, X, whereas, oral surgery, it's Y. So to understand really what the expectations are for the type of dentistry you're performing, I think those are, there are major buckets that, as a dental office, you really need to appreciate. And then there's a lot of the fixed costs that go in there as well that your dental owners should understand. Your office managers should have a general understanding of, but really it's the variable costs that you want your dental offices to understand so that they can appreciate, what does it cost to operate this business? And that's where ownership really starts to take hold. It's like, and I equate it to, you don't just look at your paycheck when you do the budget for your family. You look at all the expenses, rent or mortgages, groceries, and everything like that. It's the same concept in this dental office. So at the end of the day, it's what's left over, and that's profit. So, I think different organizations handle it differently and look at it. But to me, it's the critical piece of understanding that you need to look at if you want to grow and scale your organization. And it's really what buyers are looking for at the end of the day when they're valuing your practice is, EBITDA or profitability.
Yeah, so get a good accountant if it's early stage, and make sure you have a good CFO if you're later stage or a larger organization, to ensure that you're staying on top of all that. Speaking of technologies, and you just mentioned procurement software, and I'd be interested in your take on this, or if you have an opinion on it. So, there's a couple massive suppliers, of course, that we all know out in the marketplace that also dabble in software and have, huge software portfolios, but they don't seem to be the ones that have developed procurement software. And procurement software, there's a number of different companies that are doing it, but it's not under the umbrella of the portfolio of products within the big suppliers, which I've always found interesting and curious as to, like, when you have that direct connection, why there wouldn't be a bigger push to be developing those solutions within those companies. And so I'm just wondering if you have a take or a perspective on that, that you'd be willing to share.
Yeah, I think that when it comes to these large distributors, um, they obviously want to sell their goods at the highest possible price they can because they have P&Ls they're looking at as well, right? And so when you start to talk about some of these organizations that are out there that are really driving their cost down by looking at procurement on a scalable, from a scalable perspective, it's kind of counterintuitive for the distributors to want that to happen. Now, that I think that's the old thinking. I think now with DSOs growing and becoming more and more powerful in the dental space, it's going to become necessary for these large organizations. To me, the perspective should be, hey, we can now capture more of their business if we do have a procurement platform. We know what they want to buy, so we can get out in front of it rather than find out after they cut us off because someone else is offering whatever that product is for cheaper. So I think that paradigm is starting to change. Whether they're willing to invest, or buy one of these procurement companies to be able to do it themselves, I haven't heard of their interest in that yet. But it makes sense to me. I think we've seen it in other, in kind of the medical space and some of the other spaces that exist. And to me, that's the interesting thing is that within healthcare, there have been different progressions.
So what would you say are some of the force multipliers that really accelerate the value that's being driven within a DSO? What are things that people should look at separate and apart from the data and the P&L that are, I don't know, like the kitchen remodel, if you will?
Yeah, no, I think when you look at the deals that have been done over the past couple of years, it really comes down to integrations. How well integrated are these practices? And maybe it's not, are they all on the same exact practice management system? Although, that's a huge positive as well. but is there an enterprise view? Are there financials? Are there KPIs that you can look at that marry the entire organization? And do you have management efficiencies within the organization? So I think for a while, people were chasing EBITDA, right? Like they were just mashing together, disparate systems and disparate organizations and just calling them DSOs. And now I think buyers have become a lot more intelligent about what it takes to grow and scale a larger organization. And, there has been a lot of interruption to that because it's required massive amounts of investment on the integration side. So, when I talk to our clients, when they say, hey, what do we need to look like to be able to sell? And, I give my company line of, you need to be a beautiful business that has a plan on how you're going to grow the day after the transaction, not up until the transaction, because you're going to sign, a 5-year employment agreement on continuing to grow this organization, whether it be a financial buyer or a platform buyer. That still has to be your plan. There has to be meat on the bone for your acquirer to create, ultimately, a larger organization. And so, that comes with a well thought out plan and an organization that's poised to grow and sustain it. So, we are called upon frequently by private equity companies now to go in and evaluate the ability of these organizations to grow and scale. So everyone has, I think what I referenced earlier, a secret sauce. So is the secret sauce of this current organization something that's replicable and scalable at a larger organization, or do we have to revisit it to shore up the secret sauce to make sure that it is, or do we have to pivot and say, got it, what got you here isn't what's going to take you there? And so I think to be able to have that thought out before you're in your management, presentations, speaks to the credibility of the organization and how well thought out you are. And so when you talk about like, how can you increase value in your organization, or at least not get, any kind of knocks on your profitability to reduce value, it's really being well thought out, being well positioned, being integrated, and profitable at the end of the day.
Got it. Last question. What are you most excited about in the dental space kind of moving forward as you look at, the overall landscape? What are the things that make you bullish about dental?
Yeah. So, I don't know, I'm a data nerd. I think that's pretty obvious after this conversation. So I think all of the AI that we're now going to be able to extract so much more data. We talked about having too much technology and too much data, but I think there is going to be a kind of a different data that's going to be available through a lot of the AI that's being done that humans are currently doing now, and they can still support moving forward, but it's going to give us some data that we haven't had access to before, or it's been really dirty data because we were tracking it through Google spreadsheets or something like that. So, I'm really excited about the increase in systematic data pulls and access to data that's going to come down the pipeline, that's going to let us really tighten up our organizations and ultimately deliver better, clinical outcomes for our patient. And it's both on the clinical side and the business side that I think that's going to be prevalent in. So, I'm not excited for robots to do the dentistry, but really excited for, that the AI opportunities that are coming down the pipeline to give us access to a lot of that data that's there.
Eric, where can people find yourself, find Skytale?
Yeah, I'd love to talk to anyone and everyone. Skytalegroup.com is our website. I'm on LinkedIn. That's usually how people connect with me. Eric Pastan, I'm out there. People spell my name wrong a lot. It's A-N, not E-N or O-N or anything like that. So through LinkedIn or the website, email me, eric.pastan@skytalegroup.com. Would love to talk.
Awesome. Hey, thank you so much for joining the show. Really appreciate the conversation.
Thanks, Mike. I appreciate your time and the invitation to be on. Like I said, it's surreal to have these opportunities. So always very appreciative.
Yeah, it's been fun. The Dental Economist Show is brought to you by Planet DDS. To find out more about how cloud-based dental software by Planet DDS helps unleash dentists and their staff to focus on patient care, visit www.planetdds.com. Stay tuned for upcoming episodes by following wherever you listen to podcasts. Thanks for listening.